everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur, and this is episode number 165 on this lovely Sunday afternoon. Saur, my friend, my co-host, how are you feeling today?
It's afternoon for you. It's almost evening for me. I've been checked out of Inter Miami for the last week since that defeat, and it's been bliss. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm ready for football to be back next week, but it's always nice to just have a little bit of time off, talk about things that aren't drama related to the team, losses, wins, and all of that. So I'm glad we're jumping on and having this conversation. And as you said, it's a nice Sunday afternoon, evening, and we can just talk everything in and around into Miami rather than a game or analyzing an opponent. How are you doing?
I am all over the place. I have spent my weekend watching American football, and it has been a lot of fun. But if I accidentally call a center back a cornerback, or if I accidentally call them points instead of goals, forgive me, my brain's been elsewhere. The U.S. men's national team, really bad showing yesterday, and a lot of people talking about firing the coach and cleaning house and all this stuff. The Miami Dolphins today, really bad showing. A lot of people talking about firing the coach and clearing staff. And I think it kind of leads into a conversation about Inter Miami and all of this, certainly not pre-planned, certainly just fortuitous that all happened this way. But leads us to ask, how good has Inter Miami been in 2025, or in inverse, how bad have they been? And so we thought we'd have a little bit of a conversation, sort of grading, maybe the wrong word, but having a conversation about how good they've been this year, or how bad they've been. Like, how would we rate their season to date? And as we get into the midweek, we'll talk about what they can do to improve that rating over the course of the final 10 to 15 games of this season. And in order to do that with any sort of perspective, I think we need to set the ground rules and set a standard for where we think we are right now. And that's what we're going to do today. Do you have any questions or opening thoughts or hypotheses as we get into some of the numbers and we talk about some of the big picture ideas?
No, I'm just a passenger. You're the captain. Just take the ship where you want to go, and we'll, as always, waffle through the hour. But I think you have a conversation in mind. I think I know what I want to talk about in this particular episode and where I want to take this conversation. So it may not be pleasant, it may not be fun, but it's important, and it'll be good to take stock of where we are, because the season's almost done. We're more than halfway through the season, and we're almost towards the end of the regular season. So this is it now. Inter Miami needs to show up now or never, right?
Inter Miami is 2 games away from matching their total games played over the course of the 2024 calendar year. They have played 43 games so far in 2025. I believe they played 45 games all of 2024. In those games this season, Inter Miami, 23 wins, 10 draws, 10 losses. Last season, 26 wins, 9 draws, 10 losses, which means if Inter Miami wins their next 2 games, and they are against pretty stiff competition, the only difference in the 45 games played last year and this year will be 1 win converted into a draw. So I think this could be a very interesting conversation, because it is, listen, the numbers don't lie. And they don't paint as unflattering of a picture as maybe we would have based on watching game in and game out. Let's start with the offense. Last season, Inter Miami had a wonderful offense. 100 goals scored. This year, they're at 82. So that is a significant downgrade. Again, they have 2 games at hand, basically, based on to catch that. I don't think they're going to score 18 goals over the next 2 games. So clearly the offense not as prolific. And I think when you look at it, that makes sense. Luis Suarez is not converting on as many opportunities. You're not getting the sort of ancillary additions from guys like Matias Rojas, Leo Campana, Diego Gomez, etc. Some of those replaced, but obviously not all of them. But when you look at the MLS, it's not that crazy. Last season, Inter Miami, or rather right now, through the 25 MLS games that they've played so far this season, they have 54 goals scored and 40 goals allowed. Last season, they had 56 goals scored and 39 allowed. So they are a 3-goal difference from where they were last season. Now, it's a little bit of a butter knifing for the defense because we just include that 6-0 loss from the Cincinnati beatdown last season. So this is like the worst possible time defensively to have this conversation. And it still was better last year. But the goals scored number are basically the same. It's a 2-goal difference. How are we feeling about the offense, who I think we have said over and over is not nearly as impressive this year and certainly not designed to be a dramatically improved offense? Most of the goal differences have come in non-MLS competition.
It's really interesting because it puts things into perspective, right? So when we're talking about Inter Miami's season, how we're feeling about it, I think writ large across the board, the fan base is very down and out right now about Inter Miami's season, whether that has to do with recent results or just performances in general. But if you talk about the statistics, the underlying goals scored, goals conceded, wins across the board, you said it. It doesn't seem to be that different from last season. Think there's a bunch of differences that we can compare with last season, but when it comes to the offense, I think Inter Miami has struggled. It's never looked fluid throughout the season. We've always thought that it's going to click. We've always given ourselves time in terms of how Inter Miami might be able to put some pieces together, make it work. But it's very clunky. It's trying to create chances. But last season, Inter Miami was scoring, I think, every opportunity that or let me rephrase that. Last season, we had a lot more opportunities than we were scoring. Is that a correct assumption? We weren't converting our XG to the same level that we are this season.
Last season, we were better against the XG, if that's what you're asking.
So we were exceeding the XG expectations.
I don't have those numbers. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I'm sorry.
Regardless, what it feels like in an eye test is last season we were creating a lot more opportunities. We may not have been converting them. This season, it feels like we've had to convert every opportunity that we've created in a game. I think we still have the same talent level with Lionel Messi, with Luis Suarez, creating those opportunities, converting those opportunities, but it hasn't ever looked at any point during the season like we're playing as one cohesive unit. So maybe the numbers are still there. We are scoring the same number of goals, but there's been times in a game where you think, where's the goal even coming from? And it's never looked like we've had a set pattern of play. It never looks like we know exactly how we want to score goals. And it's never looked like we're using a specific channel to create those opportunities. It's looked disjointed. It's looked fragmented. And yet Inter Miami has scored nearly as many goals as last season. So I think the talent is sort of pulling the average up a lot more than it normally would. And last season, it would also be interesting to see how it's been dispersed across the board, right? So how have some of the players in and around the offense contributed? I think last season there may have been more players who were actually getting goal contributions and not just Messi and Suarez. Now, I might be wrong with that stat, but it felt like that. Rojas carrying some of the goal scoring burden. We had Leo Campana carrying some of the goal scoring burden. Diego Gomez. Now, maybe Segovia, maybe Allende has covered some of that, but it still feels like we're relying on individual talent and individual moments in games rather than actual patterns of play, actual well-drilled offensive action. And that's where I stand with that right now, which is interesting because we're still scoring the same number of goals or similar number of goals, right?
I think the only explanation really is that Lionel Messi's played almost every game this year in the MLS, or, he's played, I think, 19 or 20 out of the 25 games. He played 19 games all of last season. But I do think that there's some interesting context that goes into this. Inter Miami finished the season last year on a tear. They scored 23 goals in their last 9 games. It's about 2.5 goals per game over the course of their last 9 regular season games, which is what Inter Miami has left. So they went from this point where they were slightly better last year than they are this year by 2 goals. But then they found another gear and turned it on over the course of the last 9 regular season MLS games. This season, it's been sort of the opposite. It seems like our best period came early in the season, and our best goal-scoring performances haven't always come in victories. So I think about that Dallas game. We lost 4-3. We put up 3 goals, but we still lose. I think about that San Jose game on the road. 3 goals scored, but you still get 1 point on the road. Whereas last year, it was coming in 1-goal victories seemingly every single week. Again, you look at some of the performances last season, there's a lot of 1-0s. There's a ton of 2-1 victories. So the timeliness of the goals made them seem more inevitable than they actually were. And so as we evaluate how we should judge this season, I think it's important to remember they are scoring a similar number of goals, but it feels like the timeliness is not as impactful. But that, I think, is very subject to bias and just how we remember the big moments, not necessarily how like that it's actually played out tremendously differently. The other thing I want to say is earlier this season, they were winning a ton of games. It has not felt the same since then. So we finished last year on a high, and I think it gives us a sort of false remembrance of what the entire 2024 season was. Whereas this year, we started high, and it's been not as impressive ever since. And so in this moment, we're not quite as impressed with what the offense has looked like. Again, if they want to match last year's total, they will really have to turn it on in the last 9 games of the season. But I thought this was interesting to note that through this period, it looks pretty similar. Defensively, same thing. They allowed 39 goals at this point last season, and they have given up 40 goals in the MLS so far this season. That said, I do think this is a little bit of a cherry pick in favor of 2025 right now, because we just would have added that Cincinnati loss last year, which was clearly the worst of the season. They finished with 10 goals allowed in their last 9 games. This season, Inter Miami obviously on pace to give up more than that, maybe 12 or 13 goals. So it is worse. I don't think it's fair to say it's not worse, but it is not dramatically worse.
I will say, though, this is like comparing rotten apples with rotten tomatoes, because last season our defense was not really good anyways, and we were having to be bailed out by the virtue of our offense being that good. This season, it just feels, and you've, I think, nailed it, that the goals that we're scoring are not as impactful in victories, and the goals that we're conceding are probably much more impactful in the losses. And I would agree with you. I think overall, the defense hasn't really improved. We had Serhii Christoph playing last season, Nico Freire. No, Allen was basically not even a starter up until the last few months. So the defense wasn't that great. And the fact that we've continued to, despite signing 2 or 3 defensive players, the defense continues to struggle in a very similar manner. So yes, we're comparing it to the last season, but last season was quite disastrous defensively. This season is also quite disastrous defensively. So I don't see that as a positive. I would have hoped that we had made some strides defensively, not letting as many goals in, but it just feels like the goals that we're scoring this season are not as contributive to the victories, and the goals that we're conceding are just costing us a lot more games than they would have last season. But the defense, especially, doesn't really put me with any confidence.
No, I think that's totally fair, and I guess this isn't really a value judgment, other than to be fair to Javier Mascherano and the 2025 team. They have to finish really strong if they want to match what the 2024 team did. So saying as of this moment, I think is maybe unfair to the 2024 team, who finished very strong. But that's still plausible for this team, right? They can still go out and score a bunch of goals, and Messi might have 12 goals before the end of the season. And that could be totally achievable, and Suarez might hit some form, or he might be suspended for the whole season, and Obando comes in and scores 7 goals. Who knows? But I do want to be fair to Javier Mascherano. My theory for this, offensively, is that Messi has played more. And because Messi has played more, the team has scored more goals, and Messi has scored more goals, both in the MLS and across the board in all games. Defensively, I think the team has really fallen short. And even though the goals allowed number doesn't seem worse, they're playing a much more conservative play style. I think they have moved away from that a little bit over the last month or so. I do think it is better. But if you are playing a system where you're playing deeper in your own half and you're trying to control the game a little bit better and you're a little less worried about throwing numbers forward, you would expect that to result in a better defensive record. And so even by those standards, I think an equal record is sort of a failure, especially after you get to invest a lot of resources in 2 new defenders, and they were trying to invest a lot more in the summer. So I think the offense has done an admirable job of keeping track of the 2024 goal scoring record in difficult circumstances, especially when you consider Suarez's sort of lack of form this year. But that the defense is really deserves a lot of criticism.
Yeah, and it's also the way that we've conceded some of the goals, the defensive weaknesses from last season. You could see that the players are not capable of doing what they've been asked to do. You could tell Sergei Christoph does not have the pace, will get beaten. But I think what's disheartening for this season is that we tried to make those upgrades, and despite those efforts to upgrade our defense, we continue to have the same issues. Also, we're playing players that I personally do not think are the best defenders in this team, which sort of adds to the frustration. We know there's a couple of players on the bench who could actually do a better job, allow us to play a lot more progressively. And that, I think, is what's adding to the negativity around the defense, that you're pushing players who are not necessarily capable of getting you the results that you want.
Upcode makes a really interesting observation, and that I would agree with, that if you were just going off the eye test, that tells him, and I think me as well, that the defense is comparable to last season, but the offense is worse. And I think when you look at the numbers, it actually tells the opposite story, that the offense has been sort of keeping track with what they were doing last season, and maybe it's less spread out in terms of the production, maybe it's less diverse, but that they are doing a good job of keeping track. And it's the defense that's actually been fairly underwhelming compared to last season. We have talked about, in our last episode even, we talked about Chelo Weigant not playing as well this year, especially defensively. I think you're right. The personnel in that center back spot, in those center back spots, has not been as good. And I think the goalkeeper, in terms of keeping the ball at the back of the net, has been a pretty substantial downgrade. All of those things to be said, the numbers maybe are a little different than our expectations would be.
But here's the thing, right? If you compare the previous season, where Inter Miami didn't necessarily achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve, we won the Supporter Shield, set the record, but I think that was a little bit of a curtain over an otherwise really poor season. And this season, when Inter Miami wants to actually achieve a lot more, do a lot more, win more trophies, break that barrier that you set for yourself last season, keeping pace with the previous season isn't really the standard that Inter Miami set themselves. So yeah, it's good that we're able to do that, and we haven't necessarily been worse compared to the numbers, but the expectations from last season to this season have been completely different. You brought in a new coach, you made some really serious investments in some big name players, and yet you're only achieving what you did last season. So that, I think, has to be a context that we have to keep in mind. Now, all credit to Javier Mascherano. Our performances across the board compared to last season, tournament by tournament, have been better. Under Tata Martino, we got kicked out of... Yeah, we'll get to that. So maybe we can talk about it later. But yes, we're comparing ourselves to the last season, where I think we've kept pace with everything, but I think that's not the standard.
I think you made an excellent point, that as we talk about the 2024 season, we didn't think that was good enough, and neither did the club, and neither did Jorge Mas and Lionel Messi and all, they wanted to improve after last season because they thought breaking the points record and no other trophies wasn't good enough. So as we get into sort of what we're doing in 2025, you're absolutely right. It's important to keep in mind that even last year wasn't good enough. So thank you for adding that. We should have probably started with that. That the onus on the club was to improve in 2025, not to almost keep pace. And again, they're not keeping pace, right? They are scoring significantly fewer goals over the course of all competitions. But in the MLS, they're only slightly behind. It's not dramatic or drastic in any meaningful way. And so I do want to keep that in mind as we criticize the club in various ways. They are, on paper, keeping float, maybe is the best way to put it. Okay, let's talk about the tournaments because this is the big difference from last year. Last season in the Leagues Cup, we scored 9 and allowed 8. In the CONCACAF Champions Cup, we scored 7, allowed 8. This year, in more games, it's more goals, barely more goals scored, less on a per-game basis, but also less goals allowed on a per-game basis and a slightly better record. Let's start with the CONCACAF Champions Cup because that is the first tournament chronologically. Last season, they did not have to play in the first round because they qualified through the Leagues Cup. There's 2 spots, the Leagues Cup winner and the CONCACAF Champions Cup winner from the previous year, that get to advance past the first round into the round of 16. So last year we skipped the first round, but that would have presumably been against an easier opponent that we would have won, and we would have had 2 extra wins on the sort of resume. So I think that's important to keep in mind. You shouldn't dock them because they had to start a round later and play more difficult competition. They end up playing Nashville in the second round. They get the victory. Now, that first game in Nashville did not look great. If you remember, we were down 2-1. They had a very it wasn't questionably offsides, but it was sort of not related to the goal, that they could have been up 3-1 on the road in that first leg at Nashville. That gets called back. Inter Miami scores a second late on, and they get a 2-2 draw, and then they finish with a 3-1 victory in the second leg. They move on to the round of 8, the quarterfinals, where they play Monterrey and they lose at home because of a red card, and on the road where they were outclassed. I will remind you, Lionel Messi did not play in that first leg at home. They were without him. He was dealing with an injury. So the overall record doesn't look great. They had 1 win, 1 draw, 2 losses. But I also think the competition was way, way better. If you remember, that Nashville team had been something of a thorn in Inter Miami's side coming out of the 2023 season. This year, I think a lot easier of a path. Sporting Kansas City, especially before they fired Peter Vermes, and again, this is in the earlier round. You get an easy win against them. You play Cavalier, Jamaican side, get an easy victory against them. So it's 4 wins in that tournament compared to 1 in all of 2024, but the competition has been dramatically different. And then you get into the similar levels. You play LAFC in the quarterfinals. I understand they beat LAFC in the quarterfinals, but this LAFC team earlier this year is nothing compared to what Monterrey was last season. And they had Lionel Messi for both legs of this tournament. Does the fact that they went a round later, they went to the semifinals this year as opposed to the quarterfinals last year, does that constitute an achievement to you?
I think not tangibly. If you're comparing to the last season, then obviously it's better. But I think achievement would have been going to the final and winning the final, which Inter Miami clearly
is it better
didn't
though?
do.
Because
It is better because
they didn't beat a team that they could
I can't hold that against Javier
team.
Mascherano, right? Because you can only beat the team that's in front of you. So
I understand. We're not holding it
fact
against
that-
anyone.
Yeah,
I just want to
exactly.
be clear. We're not. This is not a judging Javier Mascherano podcast.
Yeah.
This is just, did they actually do better, or do they just have an easier schedule?
No, I think regardless of whether you have an easier schedule or not, it's difficult to play a tournament which has some really good teams. And I want to give the coaching staff, the players, the credit that they deserve of getting to the semifinal. And they could have easily just rolled over for LAFC and not got that comeback win. And you could have been like, okay, yeah, we had an easier schedule, but we still lost. So I think it's better, but it's not enough
But
in my eyes. I think we
I
could have
guess
and should have beaten Vancouver in that semifinal, and the fact that we faltered when we did was, I think, sad and disappointing. But I still want to give them credit for getting semifinals at a time when I guess we weren't really functioning together as a team yet. We didn't have all our players in place. Javi Mascherano didn't know who his best players were. He probably still doesn't, but it is what it is. So I don't want to detract from the fact that they just
I'm going
had
to
an
detract
easy
from them.
schedule.
I'm going to detract from them. I don't think it's more impressive if you don't do anything you didn't do the year before. Again, they played Nashville in the round of 16 last year. That's the same team, quality-wise, as they played against LAFC this year. It just happened a round later because Inter Miami got a lucky draw so that they were in Cavaliers' bracket instead of having to play Monterrey. Or, Vancouver, for example, they went through Monterrey, they went through Pumas. I think they really accomplished something they had never done before. I look at what Inter Miami faced in the quarterfinal and semifinal, and I think it's the exact same schedule they played in 2024, and they fell, I think, maybe even in more embarrassing and underperforming ways in 2025. Again, Messi played in all 4 of those games this season. Last season, he played in 3 of 4, but he only played in 1 of the 2 elimination round tournaments. Nashville was solid last year. At home, they played well. Inter Miami ends up getting a draw, but that could have been a loss. They would have needed a big comeback in the second leg. They get the big win in the second leg, just like they do this year against LAFC. And then in the next round, they play a team that's actually competitive to win the trophy. And they embarrass themselves. And I thought this year was more embarrassing than last year. Again, last season, they were playing without Messi at home, and I thought they were going to win that game until David Ruiz gets a red card. They end up losing 2-1, again, against a good team. And then in the second leg at Monterrey, they are never in that game. They never look like they're making a comeback. And this year, they actually get the home game second. They don't perform well in Vancouver. They come home needing the big victory, and they lay an absolute egg. I think this year's run is not more impressive. I really don't. I think it's exactly the same as last year, and actually maybe even like half a step worse. So I know they went an extra round, but man, I thought it was there for them in a way it wasn't last year. I thought in order to get to the round last year, if they had beaten Monterrey, that would have been more impressive than anything they did this year. So I think it's a wash.
I think you're right. I may say that it's better, but it's not impressive by any means. And again, it reminds me of how we lost to Vancouver. And that for me is going to be a big talking point that remind me to come back to, because it's a trend in tournaments under Javi Mascherano. But I understand your point of view, and I would largely agree with it. I think, yes, when you talk about the logistics of it, Inter Miami did make it to the semifinal, which is better than last season. But if you contextualize that, if you see the opponents that we went up against, that's still not under our control. That's fine. But I think more than anything, the way we went out in that semifinal was very embarrassing. And to your point, I think sort of negates any betterment that we may have seen between the 2 seasons in that tournament.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, because of the way they went out in this year, I almost
sort of
feel
makes
like
it worse.
Yeah, I remember last season, Monterrey was probably the favorite over 2 legs, and especially once you lose the home game because of a red card that is unfortunate. But that was less embarrassing to lose on the road at Monterrey than it was this year to
And the circumstances were against Inter Miami, so you would almost wouldn't blame them for losing the way that they did.
Whereas I think this year it was one of the darkest moments of the season, really. Okay, let's get to Leagues Cup, because we'll do the Club World Cup after, because there's no comparison. Last season, Inter Miami enters the Leagues Cup. It is a different format. You do a 2-game group stage. 2 out of 3 teams go into the knockout rounds, and then you play in the knockout rounds. Last year, they beat Puebla in the opening leg, which meant the second game against Tigres was not going to be for a spot. They had already secured their spot. So the pressure was very low. Puebla, not a particularly good Mexican team. They played Tigres at NRG Stadium in Houston. They lose late, but it is a competitive game. They played Toronto in the first round in the knockout stages. They are on the verge of beating Toronto 6-0 until they get a red card. It ends up being a relatively close 4-3 game, but Inter Miami mostly in control of that game. And then they play the Columbus Crew in the second round of the knockout stages. And they lose 3-2 in a game they were up 2-0 in the 60th minute. We complained a lot about Tata Martino not making halftime subs when the momentum was turning against us. Columbus ends up scoring 3, and we lose that game 3-2, and our Leagues Cup run ends. 2025, they make it through a much more difficult phase 1, but by comparison, the group stage. They get a win against Atlas, 2-1, Chelo Wegant's sort of last-minute stoppage time winner. 2-2 draw against Necaxa. If you remember, that's where we got a red card early. Messi got injured in the first 15 minutes of that game, but then they got a red card in the 60th minute. We fight back. We get an equalizer late, and then we beat Pumas 3-1 in a relatively calm, comfortable third leg that sees us through. Then you play Tigres in the first round, lost to them last season. You make up for it, although at home, as opposed to being a neutral site game. You get a 2-1 victory. We get a couple penalties that help us through there. Orlando City in the semifinal. Really fun, exciting 3-1 game that we were not playing well for a long time, but ultimately we get the red card on Brecalo, and then we sort of put it away in the last few minutes of the game. And then the final where they played Seattle, and certainly they didn't even come close to the final last season. This year they make it to the final and lose on the road against a pretty good Seattle Sounders team. Ignoring what happened after the 90th minute against Seattle, this has to be, I think, a success compared to last season.
Yeah, I agree. I think success, if you can call it that, it was loser success because we obviously didn't win the trophy. We should have.
It wasn't Ricky Bobby's success.
Final. Yeah, it wasn't lifting the trophy, ripping our shirts off and podcast sort of success, but in comparison, it was much better than what we did. I thought last season we were very poor in the way we managed that Columbus game. The run up into the first round of the league, first knockout round was very easy. And Inter Miami's path was straightforward. And honestly, I think if we would have beaten Columbus, we could have had a really good chance.
Columbus won the Leagues Cup. So,
yeah, exactly.
Inter Miami could have gone all the way if they had beaten Columbus.
And I feel like that was very poor, probably a low point of Tata Martino's season up until that Atlanta.
By the way, not for nothing, Inter Miami loses that Leagues Cup game last year to Columbus. They do not lose another game until Atlanta in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I think they probably would have won the Leagues Cup last year. But of course they don't.
So with the criteria that we are using, I think it has to be considered a better tournament in 2025 compared to 2024. But that brings me to my point about the trend that I've talked about under Javier Mascherano in big tournaments, that when it matters, and well, big tournaments we've only seen 2, but also in the MLS, when you go up against big teams where it's 1-1, where either team can win, where it actually matters, where Inter Miami may not be the outright favorites, as you said it, we've laid an egg in both those games and also in a few of the MLS games as well. And that for me is a big worrying sign, because when this team truly needs to show up, I think that LAFC game was probably one time that I can say in the second leg where they needed to get a win. They dug down and dug deep and won. I don't remember any other game this season where
they've done it a couple times. I don't want to undermine them. They had a game at Atlanta early in the year where they get
but it wasn't really for much, right? Like when you're playing for a trophy, when you're playing for something that really matters, you've really let yourself down.
They had some moments in this Leagues Cup too that I think were there, right? That first game against Atlas, Chelo Wegant gets the goal. Jordi Alba, I think, is the goal scorer for the second against Necaxa that gets us into stoppage or into penalties, and then we win on penalties. And if we didn't do that, not just the goal to send us to penalties, but also the penalties, we would not have gone through. Obviously, Orlando City, 89th minute winner by Messi, and then the 91st minute put away by Segovia. But I do want to come back to big games because I think that's an interesting perspective. But we both agree, Leagues Cup, better in 2025 than 2024. Maybe mostly because of the moments. It was kind of a clunky 2024 Leagues Cup. We don't have to rehash it. I think we've done enough to make our point for this. Let's talk about the Club World Cup. obviously no Club World Cup in 2024. We said at the time that this might be the high point of Lionel Messi's Inter Miami era. They get a draw at Al Ahly where they look terrible in the first half, and then they really battle back and maybe unfortunate to not get a winner in the second half. An incredible game against Porto. I mean, they beat one of the biggest clubs in Europe 2-1. And then that Palmeiras game where they also looked very good and just kind of ran out of steam in the last 10 minutes of the game. And Palmeiras is able to get a couple goals late to get a draw. But they did what they had to do, which was get out of the group stage. PSG game probably not relevant to this. I think that's like a 9 out of 10 tournament, and the only way it would have been a 10 out of 10 is if you beat Palmeiras and you end up avoiding PSG and you actually have a chance in that next game. But this is, I wonder how we should evaluate this tournament in the scope of the 2025 season, because it is such an impressive thing that this club and these players were able to do, and the coaching staff too. Everyone deserves credit for what happened in that group stage of the Club World Cup. And yet it's so different and unique and so outside of the ordinary for what Inter Miami does as a club that I almost have trouble figuring out how to actually evaluate it in a standardized way with what Inter Miami's done in the past.
I don't think you truly can. And I think it's going to be definitely a highlight of the season. The biggest positive that we're going to have this season, I think. And that has to go in the giving credit to the coaching staff and the players for pulling it off, and an asterisk perhaps on top, because you can't really compare that with anything we've done in past years. But they really had to go up against opposition that you weren't expected to win, and they gave us fans good performances. They gave us some beautiful memories, and for me, that's the high point of whatever Javi Mascherano does for the rest of the time in his Inter Miami career. I think it was definitely a positive. May have actually sucked the air out of the room as well, because it almost gave us a sense of euphoria that after that, everything would be downhill. It didn't need to be, but it almost felt like the players expended themselves so much in that tournament that after that, we were never really able to emulate the same level of high in places that we could have actually.
I think it did give Inter Miami fans a sense that this was a great team still. And even though they had struggles in the first half, they have figured it out and they're ready to go. And I think we warned against that at the time because we felt this was a kind of a one-off where everyone's intensity level was going to be off the charts. And we did have a few injuries because of the intensity level. Chelo Wegon and Noah Allen and Ian Frey all missed time because of that tournament. Maybe some others that I can't remember off the top of my head. Right. I think he missed I think his injury came beforehand, but I digress. And so for me, it was just like a monumental moment for the club, but I almost don't want to give that as an achievement to the 2025 team in some sort of comparison to prior teams, because I think other teams would have been able to step up in a similar way because of the grandiose moment. And even if they weren't, we would never know. So I want to make sure we give them a ton of credit for what they did in June. But I don't know if it's fair to hold that up and say this is a great season because of this three-game stretch. Think,
and even at the time when we were watching those games, when we knew the Club World Cup was around the corner, we said this is in a vacuum of itself. This is not going to exist within the evaluation of whether the season is a success or not, because even if Inter Miami did not do well, we wouldn't have said that the season's a failure.
Correct.
So just because Inter Miami did well in that tournament does not make this season an achievement. It was almost an added bonus that we were in that tournament. It was something that we may never get to play in for the foreseeable future. So it was supplemental to what our achievement metrics is. And in that sense, you can't really pull that in when you need to, just because you haven't won anything else. So I do want to say it was a really, really impressive moment. It was great for us fans. It gave us a lot of hope. It gave us some really great moments. But you can't use that as a measure of success for this season, because that's not what your expectations were, even if you performed well or poorly in that tournament, it wouldn't really change how we evaluate the season. So
It's a cherry on top. But if
exactly.
it's a cherry on top of an empty cup, it doesn't do you much good. If it's
Yeah,
a cherry
it's
on
an
top of a
additive,
great
it's a
sundae, right?
supplemental. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I agree. And so I want to make sure we give them due credit for that without crowning that as the most important thing that could have ever happened. Because it was great and it was awesome and we really basked in the glory of it, but I don't think it's like representative of the rest of the season in a real way. Okay, let's do big games this year. And I'm kind of just going to wing this quickly. So, I may miss a game here or there, but I'm going to do the top 5 or 6 teams in the league this year, or I guess the continent, if there's a big League MX team on the schedule, and talk about how those performances went. They played Philadelphia Union this year. This is 2025. In March, they won 2-1 at home. They played the Columbus Crew. They got that 1-0 win in Cleveland where they did not look particularly impressive. Vancouver, 2 CONCACAF Champions Cup games, lost them both in unflattering ways. Minnesota United, they lost 4-1 at Minnesota. Orlando City, they lost 3-0 at home. Philadelphia Union, they drew 3-3 on the road. That was a pretty nice result. They did beat the Columbus Crew 5-1, so Columbus a little bit down this year, but still I think a solid team. Nashville, they beat 2-1 at home. Cincinnati, they lost 3-0 on the road. They drew 0-0 at home. They lost 4-1 to Orlando City at Orlando City. They get a 2-1 win against Tigres in the Leagues Cup, and they get a 3-1 win against Orlando City in the Leagues Cup. So that's certainly more losing than winning. And if you take out Columbus, who, again, is below Inter Miami in the table at present, and Inter Miami has a ton of games in hand, I wouldn't, there's certainly a lot more losing than winning for Inter Miami.
And the losing has been very poor losing.
It has been.
Like those Orlando games really give me some flashbacks.
Sorry.
and
Also,
PTSD.
Seattle, Leagues Cup final, they lose 3-0.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of 3-goal losses in there. When you
A
look at
lot
the
of it feels like when this team starts to lose, it can lose bad. And we had a couple of those results last season. I remember the New York Red Bulls one where it was downpour rain and you could almost forgive the players for not showing up, and against Cincinnati as well. But we almost got our own back every time we had a poor result. We went on a long stretch of wins. We were able to justify, okay, this was just an anomaly. This season, it no longer feels an anomaly. Like when we go into some of these games, Inter Miami is no longer the favorite. Against Seattle, I don't think we were the favorites to win. Against Orlando, they've got our number through and through. If not for that Leagues Cup win in the semifinal, Inter Miami we would have a really poor record against a rival who's, to their credit, we're doing really, really well. But still, no excuse for us to lose so badly to them twice this season. Columbus, we beat really well. That was, I think, a very impressive performance. Again, another high point of the MLS season. So I don't want to take that away from Javi Mascherano. But I think, long story short, it doesn't feel like this team is invincible by any means. And worse than that, if we start to lose, it can be a really bad loss, which for me is a worrying sign of how the mentality of the team can be in some of these big games.
Yeah, so let's go through 2024 because I think maybe that's the point, is not that they're winning more or losing more, but the way those big games go is different. Last year to start the season, they played the Galaxy, future MLS Cup champions. They were losing 1-0 and should have lost that game 4-0, except they get the equalizer in the 86th minute. They find a way to get a draw. The next big ones against Monterrey, that first leg at home without Messi, they look like they're going to win that game until David Ruiz gets a red card and they go down a man. And they end up losing 2-1. Certainly that road Monterrey game, nothing to brag about. Future MLS Cup finalists, New York Red Bulls, they get a 6-2 win at home after a 4-0 loss on the road on international duty when they're missing a bunch of their guys. Messi, Drake Callender, a bunch of their players. Trying to remember who was good last season as I go through this. But Columbus Crew, who I think we all remember as one of the 2 big rivals for Inter Miami last season, we go 2-for-3 against them. And the loss, as we've already mentioned, that Leagues Cup loss where we're winning 2-0 in the 60th minute. It was a very competitive loss. Cincinnati, we lose 6-1 in an embarrassing game. Messi also didn't play that one. But we come back and we get a 2-0 win a couple weeks later against them at home. Again, the 3-2 win against Columbus. Ultimately, we were undone by like one team that had our number all season. Atlanta had us 3-1 in that first game. It was a 1-1 draw, no 2-2 draw late in the season, and then obviously in the playoffs, we know what happened. But even against the best teams, Tigres, I didn't mention, a 2-1 loss, but a competitive loss. They won that game in the last 10 minutes of the season. So it was seemingly much more competitive, where the only two games we talked about there that were really outlandish were that 6-1 loss to Cincinnati and that Monterrey away game. This season, it feels like there's been 4 or 5 or 6 of those moments.
You know what another difference is?
What?
A lot of those bad losses last season didn't have Messi.
Yeah.
A lot of the bad losses this season have had Messi. And it almost feels like Inter Miami, like you can tell that this is going to be a bad loss with the way that the other team is playing. So I think it's very telling where this team is at in terms of consistency. And sometimes you can excuse bad performances, which we could last season, but this season they haven't been a surprise, or they haven't been a shock to anybody. And we lost to Seattle 3-0, I believe, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Again, that was slightly flattering to Seattle. We conceded a couple of goals towards the end.
But Orlando City, not in a 4-1 loss. Orlando City in a 3-0 loss. Cincinnati on the road, 3-0 loss. So, you know, the Vancouver series, 5-1 overall, 2-0 on the road, 3-1 at home. Yeah, it wasn't great. 4-1 loss to Minnesota. So it's the vibes. And maybe we should end on the vibes. And it's the eye test. Because if you look at the overall numbers, and the reason why I wanted to do this is because I don't want someone in the Inter Miami front office to look at this season on paper and say, they had a success, we're good, run it back. Unless it actually is good. And we're going to present the numbers to be fair. But let's end with vibes, because this maybe is how everything is graded and represented. And certainly you can ask Dolphins fans about that today, right? They lose their first game, but it's also time to fire the coach and the quarterback and the GM.
And let me be clear. I'm shocked that the numbers are the same or similar compared to last season, because it doesn't feel like that. But again, this team has been built to improve on those numbers. This team has been creating expectations that say we're going to do better than last season. So the fact that we're barely reaching the numbers of last season isn't something that they could be proud of or say or use as a metric to say that this season has been a success. So that, I think, needs to be clear.
And one of the other things we haven't mentioned yet, to really any detail, they are pushing their star players way harder and farther than they did last year. Messi's already played 800 more minutes this year than he did all of last season, and that's going to be he's going to play another 700 before the end of this season. Luis Suarez has already played 500 more minutes than he did all of last season, and it's similar numbers for Jordi Alba and Busquets. And I'm sure Rodrigo de Paul isn't getting any rest soon.
Ash in the chat mentioned that it doesn't feel like we're using the full roster. And for me, that's exactly representative of what you just said. We're relying on our superstars and pushing them beyond limit.
So when the stats are the same, but you're playing your best players more, and they're not the same. They're a little bit worse this year. Mm-hmm. But when they're similar, worse, but you're also pushing your best players harder, and you should be getting better results based on the talent on the field, it's hard to say it's been even as good as last season, even though when you look at it block by block without putting the whole context together, it does actually feel relatively comparable. And then again, we said this in the beginning, but I want to reiterate. The team finished really well last season. That Columbus Crew Leagues Cup loss, which was on August 13th, which would have been 3 weeks ago from this year, they did not lose again until the playoffs. And they won almost every game. I think they had 3 draws in their last 10 or 11 games. And And so for Inter Miami, if they even want to keep pace with what they did last season, they're going to have to turn it up another gear over the last 9 games of the regular season and going into the playoffs. Okay, let's get to vibes, because what else matters, really? It feels like last season, the vibes were pretty good for most of the season, outside of an early season stretch that accumulated in the loss to Monterrey. Aside from that, they had 1 week where they lost to Atlanta and drew St. Louis, come back with 4 straight wins. By the way, after the Monterrey loss, where they lost 3, they had 5 straight games where they drew 2 and lost 3. So that's a bad stretch. They won 7 out of 8, got a draw. Then they had that week where they lose to Atlanta and get a draw against St. Louis. Then they won 4 straight. They lose to Cincinnati, win 3 straight. They crash out of the League's Cup against Columbus, and they win 7 out of their next 10, and the 3 are draws. So they get 7 wins and 3 draws from their next 10 games. And then they lose the last 2 to Atlanta. So there was no prolonged stretches of frustration. It was pretty high with some really frustrating moments, but it was pretty good all season, except for that little bit in the beginning where, again, Messi was not available for much of. This season, we get the stretch early. We get 8 wins from our first 9 games. And then since then, it hasn't actually had much sustained success. We have that 10 or 12 game period where we get a loss, draw, win, loss, 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 win, loss, draw. That is not great. And then you get 2 wins in a row before your next draw. You get a later 3 wins in a row before your next loss. There is no sustained, continued dominance.
And you know what that is?
This season.
That is just a normal MLS team's record. That's what it is. That's what a normal MLS team would play like. You can't expect to win every single game.
And a good MLS team. A good MLS team.
Yeah.
But not a great MLS team.
Last season, we expect to win every single game that we went in. And when we didn't win, it would be disappointing. And I remember, it would almost be like the world's crashing down. And then next game, we just bounce back with this great victory again. So this season, it just feels like we've never actually got going. It's always stop-start. There's no recognition of how we want to play certain games. And honestly, we've gone into pre-games thinking, okay, there's a way that we actually lose this game. And that wasn't the case last season. Last season, we were very much, Inter Miami's got this. And if we would lose, it'd be a massive surprise. So,
and when that happens, you're at a point where you can pinpoint individual mistakes from either the coaching staff or the players, and you have to try and fix it and tweak it to get back on track. This year, when it's so inconsistent, there's so much that needs to be worked on that it's almost difficult in the course of a 1-hour podcast or a 45-minute raw reaction or an hour-and-a-half post-game show to really address the underlying issues, because it's not this center back's out of position. It's not the coach should have pulled the midfielder in the 60th minute instead of the 75th minute. It's like the midfield doesn't look good and the defense doesn't look organized and the attack
shape
isn't
doesn't look
clicking.
good. The players are the same, if not better, and they're still not performing the way we want them to. Or the eye test shows that they're playing disjointed. It feels cracked. It doesn't feel like we have a genuine plan of how we want to play, and that's where we are. That's why it's always a toss-up going into games, right? Inter Miami could be this one great team that we see them from time to time, but they could also be this really poor team that can roll over for any team that comes up against them. So it's inconsistency.
And I want to get back to 2024. Why did it feel so good last season? And I think the answer is relatively simple. You had a lot of game-winning moments that were feel good because Kramaski got a winner at Charlotte, because Leo Alfonso and Yannick Bright created a winner in Philadelphia, because Leo Campana was coming in against DC United and getting a banger for a winner, and he was coming on the road against Toronto to get a banger for a winner. And so one of the things about feel-good teams is you have a lot of players involved, you're getting contributions from across the roster, and you ultimately can relate to the players in sort of meaningful ways. And so not only are they not quite as effective this year, but a lot of the feel-good factors, kids coming out of the academy, players
Yep.
developing, getting contributions from all sorts of different places, like all the things that make soccer, following as a fan of a team, fun over the course of a season, a lot of them are missing. And so when we're talking about vibes, I think that's also a part of it. We don't see kids out of the academy coming through. We don't see young players developing in a meaningful way. And maybe the one or two examples that we do have, we're like talking about it all the time because it's so
that's
exciting.
what we have to grab at. Yeah.
Right. And, not really to talk about some of the off the field or sort of non-soccer related aspects of the club, both from the player's perspective, like we saw after the Seattle game, but also from the front office. Like the vibes are bad, not just from the football, but around the team.
And okay, maybe not catastrophically bad, and there's still room for this season to be a brilliant success, but they're just off. They're just off. And it doesn't feel like Inter Miami is going to win anything this season. I'll be very honest. I said the Leagues Cup was probably our last chance to win a trophy this season. I still stand by it. And I think you said it really right. We've let some very important players go. We haven't been able to utilize the players on the squad properly. Alan Abondo was brought in, and we were so excited for him. He scored a goal in his second game, and we haven't seen him ever since. Whether that has to do with an injury, whether that has to do with Javi Marciano utilizing some of the young players, every time last season things were going wrong, there was something that we would be able to look to and think, okay, this is at least working in this team's favor. We would be excited to see Ian Frey come back from injury. We would be excited to see Yannick Bright play. This season, it just all feels very stagnated. And that, for me, is the word for this season. Stagnant and stale. And it doesn't look like it's going to improve. And there's something lacking, but it's not just one thing. It's multiple different somethings. And that, for me, is not the sign of a winning team.
I want to give sort of score out of 10 for what the season's been so far so that we have a standard for when we get to the end of the season and we can use this going into our next podcast. But our next episode, sometime this upcoming week, is going to be about what can Inter Miami do from here to have as much success, to be as much of a success as possible at the end of 2025. I'm just going to go through the 9 games they still have in the regular season, and then they'll have the playoffs. And this is a very good Eastern Conference, so I don't think there's going to be any gimmies in the Eastern Conference this season in the playoffs. Like, I think legitimately you might be playing a 46 or 47 point team in the first round as the winners, and certainly as the losers. You're talking about a really good MLS team
50,
in the first round.
Yeah.
So this upcoming weekend we play Charlotte on the road. Charlotte is as hot as any team in the MLS right now. They are
5
third
wins.
in the Eastern Conference. They are climbing the table quickly. That is a team 2 months ago we thought was in the rearview mirror permanently, and they are now ahead of us. Then the following Tuesday we play Seattle. Now that game's at Chase Stadium, but we just saw what it looks like against Seattle. Those are 2 tough games. Those are the 2 hottest teams in the MLS
Not
right
guaranteed victories.
In no way are they guaranteed victories. Then you play a home game against DC United. That one, Inter Miami should feel good about, but we did just see them get a 1-1 draw against DC, although rotated. They were rotated. They play NYCFC at New York, and you can just write that one off. They're not winning that game.
No, that's done. We're not winning that one.
They're not winning that game. They might get a point, but they're not winning that game. There is no game I'm more confident in for the rest of the season than us not getting 3 points at Citi Field in New York. Then they go on the road to Toronto. Remember last season, we rotated. We had to wait for a Campana winner in stoppage time. 3-game home stretch, Chicago Fire, New England. You think you can pick up some points there. Then they play Atlanta on October 11th. That's during the international window. Some people are saying Messi's not going to go on Argentine duty. They are done with World Cup qualifying, so those will just be friendlies, and he'll stick with the team. But even if Messi does stay, Velasco Segovia is not, Fafa Picault's not. You're going to miss 5 or 6 players. Right? 8 players left this past window. You're going to lose 5 or 6 of them for this upcoming, the October window. So I don't know if that's a guaranteed victory. It's also going to be Atlanta United's sort of Super Bowl. because that'll be their last meaningful game of the season. And then you play a Nashville team on the road in the final game of the season. Nashville's pretty good. So, like, I think you're looking at 3 comfortable victories there. DC United at home, Chicago at home, New England at home. And again, last year, Inter Miami really took off from this point on. So they got their work cut out for them. But, of course, it's all in front of them.
How many games is it? 9?
9.
That's 27 points still.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we break 20.
I put it on Twitter today. I think they're going to get 16. That's my guess.
Yeah.
If they get 16.
Be a hard run.
Now, we'll have this conversation in more depth on later this week. But if they get 16, that'll put them at 62 points for the season. That's pretty good. Like, that's a pretty good season. The last 9 games Inter Miami played in the MLS, they got 17 points. I think the schedules are pretty comparable. There's probably more guaranteed wins in the last 9 games. You had a couple Montreal games and LA Galaxy game. Not quite as easy of opponents, but maybe also not quite the Orlando City and Cincinnati's in this next stretch. So pretty comparable schedules. They got 17 over their last 9 games. So if they do that, they'll finish with 63. They'll probably finish 2nd or 3rd in the Eastern Conference. And then they go in the playoffs, which would be a 10, 11, 12 point drop from last season in the race, the MLS league table. But of course, they can win all 27 and still finish with 73 points, which would put them just 1 point behind last season. And I think if they did that, we'd all be feeling pretty good about them. So it's all to play for them. Saur, last question. How would you rate out of 10, scale it out of 10, this season so far, based on everything they've gotten and accomplished to this point, September 7th, 2025?
I'd say 5, and I give them 1 extra point for the Club World Cup. So 4.
I was going to say 4, but I think that's fair. I think you get an extra point for the Club World Cup. So a 5 out of 10. They can still make this like an 8 out of 10 season.
Absolutely. You win the MLS Cup, it's a 10 out of 10 in my opinion.
I disagree with that.
Because we've qualified for the CONCACAF Champions Cup and all that, but still, yeah.
No, but if you had won the CONCACAF Champions Cup this year and the Leagues Cup and the MLS, that would have been a 10 out of 10. So you have to dock points. Like, you can't just give them a 10 out of 10.
I agree with you. I completely agree with you. 8 out of 10 if we win the MLS Cup.
But of course, if you do that, you finish with the vibes high and everyone feeling good and everyone looking back on this season a lot more brilliantly than they are right now. So I'm going to agree with you. 4 out of 10, not including the Club World Cup, but they get a bonus point for being Porto and playing better than Palmeiras. And I respect that. Saur, any final thoughts before we wrap it up today?
No, I think it's been a topsy-turvy season. I will say there's been moments this season where we've really enjoyed this team. The euphoria has been there. But largely
hold on,
speaking,
stop. Now, because there's a question in the chat, and I think that's important. CS says, does Miami win the Supporters Shield? That's not the one I'm talking about. He says, CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinalists and Leagues Cup finalists, and you give them a 4 and a 5. That's crazy. And I think maybe that was the point of this conversation, was the numbers on paper are pretty good.
Yeah.
They're not scoring significantly fewer goals than last year when they were the best offense in the league. The defense is not worse in terms of goals allowed through this point in the season. 1 goal difference. They have gone farther in the tournaments.
But they haven't.
It's just
completed
the vibes aren't good, man. The vibes aren't good.
Completed the tournament, right? They haven't won the tournament.
And I think
you get knocked out in the first round and you get knocked out in the semifinal, or you get knocked out in the final. It's the same thing, right? Orlando's taken home. Well, I think the Leagues Cup slightly more so, because getting to the semifinals and getting to the finals won us the place in the CONCACAF Champions Cup next season. So that maybe is a bigger achievement for sure. But I think overall, it doesn't really matter if you finish in the semifinal or the final of a tournament like CONCACAF Champions Cup. If you don't win, it's nothing. It's nada, 0. So,
well, and if you go to the final and you're on the road against an incredible opponent that you were maybe the underdog against anyways, and you have a competitive loss, like, that's one thing. If you get embarrassed by the first competitive team you play against, it doesn't matter which round it is, I think, in my opinion. So if they win the Supporter Shield, if they win the MLS Cup, like it can still be a better season than last year. But I agree, man. 4 plus 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I interrupted you. Final words.
No, I was going to say the vibes are off, and I hope for this team's sake, for the fandom's sake, we pull a rabbit out of the hat of the last 9 games and really lift us up. But it's all about the winning and the trophies, man. If we don't win, there's not going to be anything to talk about in terms of success. So you got to win the trophy, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. You win the MLS Cup, and I think we can call this a season's success.
Well, I think you can have a success even if you don't win the MLS Cup. Maybe not. I don't know. Like, I think there's a difference between getting embarrassed in the semifinal and losing by a last-minute winner in the final.
Let's
I hear what you're
talk when
saying.
that happens.
If you want to have the Ricky Bobby standard, if you're not first, you're last. I get it, and maybe we should as Inter Miami fans and as fans of the team with Lionel Messi. But we can have that conversation when we get there. Guys, we will be back later this week or in this upcoming week to have an episode really getting into detail about what we think is going to happen over the course of the rest of this season. Until then, I hope you have a lovely night. We will see you guys next time. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.